presentation that we planned for you today. It kind of brings full circle to today when rightly, as an active and growing church, we're concerned about our present and our future, but I think it's always good to look back on something of our history, which is very full and rich. So we're going back to just a sliver of two of the most eminent Unitarians, or maybe when I say former, probably. Anyway, that's Ralph Waldo Emerson and Margaret Fuller, who were both in their truth seekers as we are. And Margaret Fuller was Emerson's mentor and disciple, although, and I think there in many ways, as you will see with today's dialogue, she could be his equal as well. So the overall title of our presentation is Margaret Fuller by Genius Belonging to the World. That's the epitaph on the monument dedicated to her in Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the full epitaph is, by birth a child of New England, by adoption a citizen of Rome, and by genius belonging to the world. So today we observe belatedly her birthday. She was born on May 23rd, 1810 in Cambridgeport, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. Margaret who, you might ask? I first encountered her name in A Chosen Faith by John Buren's and Forest Church, a book on the Unitarian Universalist tradition that I assume is familiar to most of you, if not all of you. That led me to reading two of the several biographies of her, Margaret Fuller, A New American Life, published in 2013 by Megan Marshall, and The Lives of Margaret Fuller, published in 2012 by John Madison. Why so many books about a 19th century woman who lived for only 40 years until her tragic death in a shipwreck off Fire Island, New York in 1850? Fuller was a pioneer of women's rights at a time when, according to Professor Ashton Nichols, women, quote, could not vote and had no significant political rights or role of any kind. A woman in Massachusetts could not own property distinct from her husband until 1854. Women had virtually no access to higher education or advanced professional education. Manual factory labor, domestic work, and teaching were their only acceptable occupations. A woman, regardless of her position in society, was expected to have her life determined by men and her relationships with men, end quote. As indicated by the title of Madison's biography, The Lives, plural, of Margaret Fuller, she defied convention and conformity by becoming in turn a child prodigy of the intellect, a misfit, the head of her family after her father's early death, a single woman until near the end of her life, a public intellectual, an author, editor, and critic, a traveler both in the United States and abroad, a cultivator and confidant of famous personages from several walks of life, and a supporter of the 1848 revolution in Italy, where she became the lover of an impoverished Italian marquis, considerably younger than herself, the mother of his son, and eventually his wife sometime before their child's birth. The roots of Margaret Fuller's family were in the Unitarian Church, and she met and was influenced by several of its prominent ministers and preachers, such as William Ellery Channing. After she met Ralph Waldo Emerson, an ex-Unitarian minister, he became one of her most important mentors and supporters, and they corresponded until the end of her life. Today, the centerpiece of my and Miriam Epskamp's presentation is a dramatic dialogue between Waldo, as he preferred to be called, and Margaret, written by the Reverend Mark W. Harris, the minister of First Parish in Watertown, Massachusetts, and the author of several books on Unitarian Universalism. My original intention was to attempt such a piece myself, but I quickly discovered that it required a level of reading and scholarship beyond my resources and available time. So I am happy to have discovered Reverend Harris's scintillating and provocative work. It was written for a worship service in Milton, Massachusetts. Much of the dialogue consists of passages from the writings of Emerson and Fuller, woven together with Reverend Harris's own words. With that, I turn our presentation over to our narrator, Darby Fetzer.
We know Ralph Waldo Emerson. We know the sage of Concord who gave us the doctrine of self-reliance and the belief in the oversoul. He was the leader of the Transcendentalist movement and is remembered as one of the most important cultural figures of the 19th century. The son of a Unitarian minister, Emerson followed his father's footsteps, but resigned his pastorate at the Second Church of Boston, where he liked the preaching, but not the sacramental rituals or the daily interchanges with parishioners. Then he launched a career as a lecturer. His fame began to grow with the publication in 1836 of Nature, which outlines a philosophy based upon intuitive experiences of the divine in nature and the human soul. 2 years later, he caused a storm of controversy with his Divinity School address, which attacked historical Christianity. We know Margaret Fuller less well. That is unfortunate. She was one of the brightest intellects of antebellum America and the editor of the Transcendentalist journal, The Dial. As a child, she endured the rigid intellectual disciplines of her father. What she gleaned from this was what few of her female peers possessed: self-respect and self-reliance. Every step she took proved something about feminine potential and the restrictions of masculine privilege. Her Conversations for Women from 1839 to 1844 were important forums on culture, politics, and women's rights. Her friendship with Emerson had a profound impact on both of them, intellectually and personally. Their attempts at forging a friendship were a frequent subject of discussion between them and a source of inspiration and irritation to both. Margaret visited Waldo and his wife Lydian many times in their Concord home. During one of these visits in October 1841, they communicated by sending letters back and forth from their respective chambers, using Waldo's son as their courier. Their long-standing debate about friendship once moved Waldo to reflect upon his, quote, strange, cold, warm, attractive, repelling conversations with Margaret, unquote. If we return to the 1840s, we might hear them right now in the Emerson parlor.
Margaret, I am pleased that you have come to lay siege to my chicken coop. You are a great refreshment to me. We are beginning to become acquainted, though it might be a couple of centuries before we are the best of friends.
I have received much sustenance from my visits here. I especially like to be in your library when you are out of it. There is so much soul there, I do not even need a book. When I come to you, I cannot receive you because you cannot give yourself. It does not profit. But when I cannot find you, the beauty and the permanence of your life comes to me.
Do you prefer the ghosts I leave behind over my own presence? I am aware of my imperfect discourse, but it is not due to any deficiency of affections. I would gladly spend the remainder of my life in your society. Why, you can confide in me at any time, and I would gladly be as true a brother as ever blood made.
Despite what you say, dear R., you are a minister who eludes my acquaintance. I expect a friend to provide a clue to the labyrinth of my being.
Well, I left the ministry because I could not speak or feel freely. I could not be a man quiet and whole.
Show me. Your neighbors say that you're always on stilts, except when perched in your lecture rostrum. You speak of the Godhead, the oversoul that dwells in everyone. Where is yours?
I seek honest convictions and deep religious affections, and the churches I knew seemed to prefer conformity, complacency, and lip service in their religion.
We must be willing to grow into God. Others would enforce God's presence by a spell. They are not willing to learn by the slow processes of their own experiences. They want to bind God in a word that they might wear around their neck as a talisman.
Well, our worship too often knows no real life, speaks not of laughter and tears. There are some people on Cape Cod who are so dispirited by the church that they are known as the come-outers. They assemble in front of the church on Sunday morning during the time of service and yell to the throng inside, "Come out!" Sometimes I am told they enter the church and trample across the cushions during the sermon. My gods may not be found in church, but neither are they with these buffoons. I cannot abide these tactics.
But are they not expressing honest disaffection with the church as you do?
Now, this is the work of crowds in church on the street. Man is stronger than a city. His solitude is more prevalent and beneficial than the concert of crowds.
You depend on yourself, that you fail to comprehend the power of the city, the power of community, of relationship. I take great pleasure in what you say about living presence of beauty in nature. You prefer the country, your woods, your gardens, and I doubt not that there is a better condition of life there in some degree. But one may also be vulgar and idle in the country, and earnest and wise and noble in the city.
We meet and treat each other like foreign states, one maritime, one inland, whose trade and laws are essentially unlike.
I must die if I do not burst forth in genius and heroism. I cannot nurture my life by traveling widely in Concord. I am starved by wise restraint. I have an appetite for the actual, not the metaphor.
Well, is this not living to you?
I was not born a common womanly lot. There is no being who can keep the key to my caricature. I knew I should be a pilgrim or a sojourner of earth. You like a sure place to lay your head. But as for me, such being can only find their homes in hearts.
Your heart unceasingly demands all. I know there is some inhospitality of soul in me, yet you live in a sea that never seems to ebb. You visit me at my house and would have me love you, but what shall I love?
Give me truth. Cheat me by no illusion.
Although I prize my friends, I cannot afford to talk with them and study their visions, lest I lose my own. It would give me a certain household joy to quit this lofty seeking, the spiritual astronomy, and come down into warm sympathies with my friends. But then I know well I will mourn always the vanishing of my mighty gods.
You live in your own way. You would not soothe the feelings of a friend because you would not wish anyone to do it for you.
Oh, you are too superior to the rest of your sex to be the object of romantic affections. I have always admired your energy, your insight, your intellect.
It is true. I now know all the people worth knowing in America, and I find no intellect comparable to my own.
Oh, Margaret, you seem to be destitute of that virtue commonly called modesty.
I love best to be a woman, but womanhood at present is too straitly bounded to give me scope. You have inspired me greatly, but even your dear wife comes to me and moans. Where is the living soul I can grasp? Why is he not there for me?
Margaret, you make everybody restless by always wanting to grow forward. How can I be your friend?
You say elevate the individual. Would you not let me elevate myself? I would have my friends tender of me, not because I am frail or uneducated or lacking passion, but because I am capable of strength.
Well, let us live as we have always done. You expect me to explain myself. Do not expect it of me again.
You frustrate me in my attempts to know you. With all your faith in man, you have but little faith in men. The higher we rise in conversation, the sadder I feel.
Well, I am uncomfortable that you seek such a shocking familiarity. I cannot be productive if I am subjected to emotional excitement. I know I may from you, but I cannot help myself.
Is your life real? Do you mean what you say, or is this merely metaphor?
I am frustrated with my inability to communicate. I want to live with people who love and hate, who have muses and furies. Pummel me black and blue with sincere words. Electrify me by your eloquence. Part of me longs for this passion, but I also dread how it may drain me.
Waldo, how can you expect the muse to come to you? She hovers near. I have seen her several times, especially near night. Sometimes she looks in your study windows when she can get a chance, for they are almost always shut.
Our friendship, sadly, is based on the truism that you have something to give that I am unable to receive. I am better able to tell people how they must want to live rather than in showing people true living.
This light will never understand my fire. This clear eye will never discern the law by which I am filling my circle. This single force will never interpret my need of manifold being.
I may seem insensitive, but I must live by the laws I comprehend, and they are completely self-contained. The only source of divining truth is what each of us hears when God speaks through us in our own conscience. No one can change you. I must be true to myself.
I would have women lay aside all thought, such as being taught and led by men. I would have her dedicate herself to the sun of truth, and go nowhere his beams did not make a clear path. I would have her free from compromise, complacence, from helplessness, because I would have her good enough and strong enough to love one and all beings from the fullness, not the poverty of her own being.
Fuller never quite achieved her dream of relating to Waldo out of her full depth of being. Emerson later recorded his fear that he lacked the courage to confront her life, a life whose activity, audacity, and integrity made his seem cowardly and trifling. Waldo was comfortable with the pastoral life in Concord, but Margaret had to live life to its fullest. Margaret Fuller went on to work for Horace Greeley at the New York Tribune, becoming the first woman reporter. Her early discovery of the oppression of women led her to write the first comprehensive feminist book in the United States, Woman in the 19th Century. Her spirit of adventure and romance led her to Italy, where she became involved with the revolution, fell in love with a radical named Ossoli, and gave birth to a child. Tragically, she attempted to return back to America with her family in 1850, but she died in a shipwreck off Fire Island, New York. Henry David Thoreau, that other transcendentalist voice and friend of Emerson, searched on the beach in vain for her body. Only recently have we begun to understand her influence as a pioneering feminist, literary critic, and central figure in the transcendentalist movement. As for Emerson, his reputation grew and grew as he continued to speak and to publish. Today, he is acknowledged as one of 2 or 3 most important authors in the 19th century. The story of Emerson and Fuller's friendship makes us ask how we can reconcile the inward life of growing one's own soul versus the outward life of relationships and struggles for freedom in society. Emerson and Fuller struggled with this dilemma. We remember the beauty of Emerson's words and thought, but may we also remember the beauty of Margaret's thought, her dream of what friendship could be, and her courageous life. And so it is.